So I'm pretty sure that my neighbor is possessed. I know it's a hefty statement, but I just can't get this out of my mind, and I've been thinking about it, so I'm going to be writing about it and just seeing where the chips fall in the end. If it doesn't make sense, well, then forget it. I guess I'll know more on Thursday, but here's where I'm at now. My neighbor, Hank, he's a middle-aged single man. He's a bit older than my own father and is generally very helpful, personable, and I'd consider him a healthy guy. I see him outside walking his dog more often than any other neighbor. He's out mornings and evenings. He really is a nice, normal guy. Usually around 7 p.m. I'll go out for my cigarette, and he'll come over to the fence and chat for a bit, while his dog, Molly, does her business. I always enjoy it. With a lot of things, I'm a creature of habit, and so is he. Routine is important to both of us, and for some reason, it makes me feel safer in this neighborhood. After all, I live alone and not really in the fancy Hollywood Hills, just the valley outside of them. So it's nice to have someone you can trust. Well, now, I don't know what the fuck to do. Excuse my language. Saturday night, I go out for my cigarette. I don't immediately see Hank, but that's fine. He's likely around, I tell myself. I'm sitting there with my gaze off to the right, and as I'm enjoying myself, my cigarette eventually comes to an end. I turn to put it out, and there's Hank, standing almost where he normally does, just staring. He looks unwell, bags under his eyes and expressionless. Even though the sight of him just standing there is unsettling, I sort of rush over to him. I'm concerned by his color, and at first, he says nothing when I ask if he's all right. But then he just smiles, and it's an out-of-place smile, one that made me straighten up my stance and back up a bit. I hear something on his side of the fence, and that's when I realize, no Molly. I ask him, "Is that Molly? Does she want a treat? I can go grab her one." I really wanted to go grab my phone more than anything. I was feeling uneasy with the lack of conversation coming from Hank. He doesn't answer me about Molly, and now the fact that I'm not seeing her, combined with his stance and behavior, it's making me nervous. Had something happened to her and he was in a state of shock? Then the sound again, or still, catches my eye. The scratching. It sounds like it's against the wooden fence, but I still don't see Molly. I start to sort of lean over my side of the fence to his, and he abruptly says, "No." He didn't put his hands on me or anything. He actually never moved his hands at all, not that I could see. But the way that he said no, he sounded mean. Then, just past him, through the window, I see Molly. She's now pressed against the glass, barking. The whole scene feels tense, and I don't really know what to do. I still hear the sound of scratching, and Hank, he's still staring at me. I decide to leave. I tell him that I'm going to head inside, but I'll see him tomorrow for church. Another routine of ours. At first, still nothing. And then as I'm walking away, he laughs. It's longer than necessary, and it's an out-of-place laugh. Just like his smile. I ignore this mostly by waving goodbye and walking inside, locking the door immediately. I head straight for my kitchen window, which gives me a view of where I just left Hank, and a bit further towards our backyards. He's still standing at the fence, staring forward. I'm truly panicked, thinking I'm going to have to call the police or something. Someone other than me is going to have to check on my friend if he basically stays out there all night. As I stood there, watching him, I realized that he was scratching at the fence. Eventually, I really don't know how long, he seemed to snap out of it. He seemed scared for just a moment, and then he ran back inside his house through the front door. It was all so wrong, but now it was out of sight, out of mind, for the most part. Until it wasn't. 10 hours later, I head over to see if Hank is ready for church. But as I reach his side of the fence, making my way up his front steps, I'm horrified to see that his fence is just covered in bloody scratch marks, right where he was standing the night before. I stop in my tracks, but I know that I have to keep going. This is my friend, after all. I get to his door, and I'm immediately faced with more blood. This time, it's across the front door. It looks sort of brown, but I know it's blood. I ring the doorbell, and almost immediately, Hank opens the door. He looks like my friend again, albeit he's messy and distressed, but his color is different. His eyes are more lively. He asks me if I want to come in for a second. I explain that it's Sunday, so it's time for church. He looks bewildered. He reaches for a non-existent phone and looks at a non-existent watch. He tells me that he's sorry he doesn't know what's happened to all of his things or the time. "You're sure it's Sunday?" he asked me. I shook my head and I told him, "Hey, it's okay if you need a minute to get ready, or if you're not feeling well, I could take you to the doctor's." Almost cutting me off, he snaps back at me. "You think I'm going to spend my day sitting in a fucking church?" I'm taken aback. I've never heard him swear, yet alone raise his voice like that. He sounded awful. A deep rasp I'd never heard from anyone, yet alone Hank. Dumbfounded, I tell him, "Well, if that's all, I better get going. I'll check on you after church." I start to leave before he stops me. "Look, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Gosh." I wanted to believe that he was really remorseful as he was apologizing for snapping. He then asks if I wouldn't mind taking him by the doctor's instead, explains that he hasn't been feeling well. So I agree. When we get to the doctor's office and we're in the parking lot, he tells me that I don't need to wait for him, that he'll catch a ride home afterwards or take the bus. It's when he's leaving my truck that I realize he's not wearing his cross. I consider it sort of like a staple item for Hank. The church we go to in town, it's just a small Presbyterian church, but Hank's cross is somewhat reminiscent of a rosary. He loves to talk about it, and most importantly, he's always got it on. It's either tucked in under his jacket or shirt, and you can see it through the collar, yet on this day, it's missing entirely. I couldn't recall if it was missing the night before, or why I hadn't noticed. He was out of my car before I could bring it up. I didn't immediately leave the area, though. Instead, I waited just to make sure he was safe. He walks in the front entrance, and before I can make a sigh of relief, I watch him walk back out. I had no idea what the heck he was doing, but I watched him walk into the woods. These woods do eventually lead back to our houses, but why was he walking that way? Why was he going home? I wasn't really sure what to do, so I called a friend of ours, a woman named Miriam. I knew that every Sunday after church, they would go for Sundays. Sundays on Sundays, they called it. They were basically old people best friends or lovers. I'm not really sure, but I know she was the only other person that was really close to Hank. She's old-fashioned, however, and she didn't appreciate me calling her as church was about to get started. Anything you've got to say to me is better said with God anyway, so get down here. I was frustrated, to say the least. When I showed up, she looked concerned. I figured that she would when she saw that I was in fact not with Hank. About 30 minutes into Sunday service, I get a phone call. Normally, I keep my phone off, but the buzz of the morning had me all messed up and I must have forgotten. I don't immediately recognize the number, so I let it go to a message. But they don't leave one. Instead, they call again, and I excuse myself. It's a local sheriff's deputy asking me if I'm indeed who I am. I confirm, yes, I am she, and he continues. Your neighbor, he says Hank's name. He's asking for you, ma'am. We've got him here at the station. He's not under arrest, but he's in pretty bad shape. The rest is just sort of a blur as I frantically agree to meet them as soon as possible. When I get inside the station, I see that Hank looks terrible. He's sitting and facing a wall. Not in a cell, just a bench in the lobby. No police even greet me as I enter and walk around. I tell Hank to sit tight, but he's already ahead of me, frozen, staring at nothing. Without much of anything, they let me walk him out of there. I ask them, did anybody call the hospital? Should I take him there? Nobody knows what to do. Church is about over, so I go to meet our friend in the church parking lot, Hank sitting in the passenger seat. He still looks terrible. But I need Miriam. I need her to see it for herself. When we park the car in the church parking lot, Hank immediately starts to liven up. He's no longer slouched. Instead, he's huffing a bit. Grunting may be an aggressive term, but it started to sound more and more like that. I have no idea what words followed the grunting. They were in a language that weren't ours. It wasn't Spanish. I don't know any other languages, but to my knowledge, neither does Hank. He repeated something over and over, to the point where I just had to get out of my car. I begged him to stop, and he laughed wildly in my direction. I quickly reached to grab my keys. I was afraid that he would try to take the car. As I did this, he reaches for my arm and says,
God never saved anyone, you fucking whore.
And he continued to laugh wildly. I ran in the direction of the church doors, and as everyone filed out, I grabbed Miriam. She grabbed 3 others and followed me to my car. Hank was gone. I took far too much time explaining everything to this group, all for them to tell me that Hank was a solid man, that he could handle anything. Finally, 2 of them, Miriam included, agreed to check on him with me. They followed me home, and as we approached the house, we could see that Hank was in the front yard, my front yard, burning something. I don't have a fire pit. The man with us, Ed, he runs towards Hank and the fire. When he does, Hank sticks his hand straight out, grabbing Ed by the throat, immediately letting go, shrieking almost like he's in pain. He runs right past myself and Miriam. Ed is still stomping the makeshift fire in the yard and rubbing his neck. But he shouts, "Call the police." And damn it, the next 4 hours, they're bad. Before the police arrive, Ed tells us what he found burning on the lawn. It was a mini Bible, one that Hank loved, one that I gave Hank. We wait for what feels like forever for the police to make their way. And then it's on me to press charges. I'm literally in tears at the thought of having to send my friend to jail. But what choice do I have right now? I beg the officers to go inside and see if they can find his cross, to please bring it with them, and they tell me that they will. But as I see Hank get loaded into the police car, he's not wearing it, and I'm filled with so much dread. I don't know what I've done, and I don't know what to do. I just know that somehow, as selfish as it sounds, I felt a lot safer knowing that Hank wasn't at his house. I find out Monday morning that Hank's going to be released. He's been evaluated by a physician, they say, and he's not showing any signs of being a danger to anyone or himself. I get home from work that evening, and I'm half expecting to see a fire. Instead, I see Hank watering his front yard, waving a nice wave in my direction, acting completely oblivious to what had just taken place the night before. I sit in my car for a while, and before getting out, I find myself putting 911 on the speed dial, and I hate this. I walk to my front door, almost not going to say anything, but I'm terrified when I hear him start to say something to me, and it's again something I don't understand. I pick up my pace, and I hear, "Rah!" causing me to jump. He laughs that laugh that won't leave my brain. I slam my front door shut, locking it immediately out of fear. A new routine that I've adopted. Soon after, I'm in my kitchen, and I see through my window Hank standing in front of it. I'm startled, but he's not looking in my direction. He's looking at his own house, but just standing there. I close the shades to offer me some relaxation for a minute. I ate some food, and I started to research providers in the area. My friend is clearly struggling. After reading several stories about families dealing with mental illness and articles relating to such, I stumble upon something that draws parallels to psychological disorders and possible demonic possession. And that's when I needed to take a break from reading. It was about 7 p.m. I go outside for my cigarette, and I see Hank. And it's so unsettling because he's back to watering his lawn, or maybe he never stopped. He then stops for just a moment, and he walks over to the fence. I'm trying to sort of ignore him, worried that he'll have something terrible to say or something creepy to do. But then I decide to ask him a question that's been on my mind for a whole day now. "Where's Molly?" He looks down, smiles this new smile that I despise, and he tells me, calmly and almost sarcastically, "Oh yeah, Molly? Yeah, she was a good girl and all, but I just had to get rid of her, you know? I'm just getting too old to keep up with her, you know?" No, I don't know, Hank. What the fuck? It's not like Molly is a spring chicken. He's had her as long as I've lived here, which is about 4 years now, and Hank loves her. My heart just broke and I started unexpectedly crying. Hank, though, he just smiled. He was pleased to see me so sad. He sighed like a fake sigh, and he looked away, continuing to smirk and continuing to water his lawn. That was last night. I didn't hardly sleep, and I didn't go to work today. And for hours, I've done nothing but call every Catholic church I can in search of a priest who can help identify possession and obsession. I've been told that someone will visit us on Thursday, but that seems ages away. The days are long and the nights are longer. It feels heavy around here. I miss my friend. I miss his dog. Someone please tell me that there's hope after something like this. In the summer of 2007, a rideshare company launched their startup in San Francisco, California. I was one of the first drivers to be hired onto the team. Being one of the first drivers for this business meant that we were basically their beta test subjects. Throw these drivers out into the field and implement changes and regulations from their reported experiences. If we had any questions or concerns, there was a number that we had to call. It acted as a 24-hour hotline to corporate. Their legal representatives would listen to your issue and advise what to do next. I'm proud to say that of my 3 years driving with them, I never ran anyone over with my car or even dinged a fender, but I did have to use that number once. Here's why. It was late, and I had just driven a few Skyline kids back to their dorms from a party when my next ride request pops up. It's only a couple of miles from where I am, and I see that they left an additional message saying, "Big cash tip." With the new rideshare program, drivers didn't deal with the money side of transactions. The ride is already paid for via the app, so seeing "big cash tip" on the comment was an extra incentive I needed to pick them up. And then I would call it a night. I press accept, and the GPS leads me to the Avalon Golf Club. Driving down Westboro Boulevard, as I approach my destination, I see 3 men standing on the side of the road. The closer I get, it's obvious that one of the men is clearly in a bad state. His blue polo is caked in blood, and the other 2 men are struggling to hold him up. I don't even pull into the clubhouse gates before they approach my car, and they open the back door to toss in the bloodied man. Then one of the men opened my passenger side door, and I start telling them that his friend better not bleed on my seats or puke. The man just sets a handful of hundreds on the passenger seat and says, "This should cover it," before quickly slamming the door. Then I watch as he and the other man walk back up to the clubhouse driveway and close the gates behind them. When they leave, I count the money thrown on my passenger seat. The guy left me over $1,200. Any apprehension about having this potential mess in my back seat has been officially relieved, and I happily put my car in drive and begin my way to the address I was given. Multiple times during the trip, I look back to check on the guy. He's still laying down and unresponsive when I ask how he's doing. Leaning back, I have to physically touch him to feel that he's still breathing. After confirming he's alive, I continue the drive in silence. The address takes me up near Balboa Park, and I'm driving on the 280. My next glance into the rearview mirror, I'm startled as I make eye contact with the man. He's now sitting fully upright in the back seat, looking back at me in the mirror's reflection. His stare is intimidating, and his brows are furrowed with rage. He's grinding his teeth, and I watch both of his nostrils begin to leak. And down his face, 2 steady streams of blood, and they continue onto his already stained polo shirt. Seeing this, I try to remain calm while retrieving a napkin from my glove box to offer him. One hand on the wheel, I lean my other arm back, but he never takes the napkin out of my hand. he just lets the blood splash onto his khaki pants and my leather seats. His gaze never leaves my rearview mirror. I'm continuously checking back between having to look while driving, and every time I look up, his stare never leaves. Finally, trying to suppress the shakes of fear in my voice, I didn't even dare to look into the back seat again, but I'm able to ask if he's needing emergency help. When his voice spoke words, it sounded like two people talking in sync. One voice was much lower than the other. It wasn't human. The tone made my blood run cold, and I'll never forget what he said.
Slow decay.
My eyes remained on the road, and I'm about to take the exit for Ocean Avenue when I hear my back door pop open. I swing my head around just in time to see this man step out of my car and onto the road. I then watch him do several violent tumbles onto the empty freeway. I slam on my brakes, and I see in my rearview mirror the man laying motionless on the road. In that moment, I'm literally about to throw the car into reverse to check on him, but before I can, I see his body begin to flail, and in some sort of seizure, he jolts and then releases back down, motionless again. And not even 30 seconds later, he's sitting straight up, legs directly out in front of him, and he's staring into the dark nothing off the side of the highway. He then jumps up unearthly fast to his feet, and he runs off the highway, hopping the median barriers and running out of sight. I sat there in shock from what had just happened, not knowing what to do. I turned off my in-service for the rideshare, and I drove home. When I got home, I called the crisis number to report what had happened, and my representative, they didn't know what to do. He transferred me to somebody else who asked me if I accrued any personal damages. When I said no, his best advice was for us to consider it an incidental statistical anomaly and that I wouldn't need to follow up with it. I used a portion of the $1,200 to get my car detailed and any trace of remaining blood out of the back seats. And then I blew the rest on 4 big kegs for my buddy's birthday the following weekend, drinking to forget and all. It was one of the scariest moments in my life, and it allowed me to be king for a weekend at a party, so no harm, no foul, I guess.